Izraelska sigurnosna konferencija, kao što ste već navikli, donosi brojne glasove. Glasove koji dolaze i sa zapada i sa istoka. Jedan od tih glasova je Adel Abdel Gafar, viši programski direktor na institutu za, odnosno na vijeću za Bliski istok, s kojim ćemo razgovarati u narednih nekoliko minuta upravo onome što se dešava na prostoru Bliskog istoka. Mr. Gafar, welcome to program N1.
Thanks for having me.
Situation in the Middle East, especially situation in Gaza, is worrying everyone for the last 2 years. But what interests me as my first question is, how do you see this wave of recognitions? Suddenly countries who were perceived through history, especially several recent decades, as staunch supporters, almost pillars of Israel, are somehow turning their backs on Israel and on Netanyahu, such as Britain and Canada and France. Why that is happening at the moment? Can we sense that? And will this really make any difference for Palestinian statehood?
That's a great question, and I think really the driver is what's happening on the ground. We've had 65,000 dead, 20,000 of them women and children at least. We've had the destruction of schools, hospitals, infrastructure. We've had the use of starvation as a tool of war. We've had multiple war crimes. We've had attacks on journalists, on media that are trying to cover the story. So for 2 years now, the world has been unable to stop this. And many of these countries that are friends of Israel have been engaged diplomatically with the Israelis over the past 2 years, Australia, UK, France, to try and back-channel their feedback. But the Israeli government has not been responsive. So this moved many of these countries to formally recognize Palestine as another pressure point on the Israelis to get back, to end the genocide and put back the two-state solution back on track. Now the real question is, how effective will this be? So I think that's the second question you asked. I think it's effective because it really highlights the international isolation of Israel. Increasingly, we've seen the speech of Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN, where the room emptied, which was quite incredible to see how the world responded there. So I think in the short term, perhaps the Israelis will become more insurgent. I don't think it will change things on the ground straight away. But in the long term, it may change the calculus of the Israelis because they're increasingly becoming a pariah state, very similar to South Africa right before the end of apartheid. If you recall, there's lots of boycotts, divestments against South Africa, and this is happening right now. If you look here in Europe, for example, Eurovision contest, they're discussing banning Israelis. UEFA Champions League, removing the Israeli teams and so on. So all of this pressure is putting the Israelis, they have a choice now. Do you want to become a pariah state, or do you want to somehow get back your reputation and intact and move towards some sort of peace process?
But Benjamin Netanyahu recently escalated this in a way that he attacked Qatar and killed Qatari citizens and members of Hamas. How is this perceived in the Middle East and in the Gulf region? Because Qatar has put its own reputation and its own credit with Hamas and others in the region and United States to negotiate, to try to reach some sort of agreement or ceasefire or anything. And now Netanyahu is attacking that hand which is stretched out to help him to get his citizens from hands of Hamas.
Well, this highlights how Prime Minister Netanyahu wants perpetual war and does not want to have any peace. You know, so we have lots of examples of this. We have the Iran-U.S. talks that were happening over the summer, and then Israel decided to attack Iran and start the conflict there. When it comes to Gaza, Israeli mediators knew that Hamas was there. The U.S. wanted the mediation to happen, knew it was happening in Qatar, and therefore provided the opportunity to have this mediation. But then again, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to bomb Qatar. So this highlights really that how Netanyahu is not really serious about peace, because put simply, he's a political calculator. Yeah, he wants to stay in power. He's beholden to the right wing of his own party, who want to take over Gaza, who want to take over the West Bank, and want to have maximalist aims across. So he's really a hostage of his own right wing as well, and they seem that they really don't care about their own hostages, because if they wanted to have their own hostages out, they could have had a deal from earlier this year. All of the hostages could have been back home right now with their families.
When we look at his rhetoric since 1990s, his rhetoric didn't change, but his actions were subdued. Was that because US administration and other administrations were more powerful with him, or knew that they don't want something like this to happen, and these last two administrations in the state let him do whatever he wants? Because when I spoke with Ken Roth from HRW, formerly of HRW, in one interview, he told me that the Biden was seeing Israel like Israel from 60s, not Israel from today's perspective, where Israel stands and what the role of Israel is in the region of Middle East.
Yeah, well, I mean, this really highlights how the strength of the Israeli lobby in the US, AIPAC, and other organizations. They're very powerful, they're very strong, so they exert very strong influence on US policy. And when it comes to the Middle East, and especially when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's the tail of the tail wagging the dog, not the dog wagging the tail. Unfortunately, they have oversized influence. But there's a very interesting dynamic, I would say, that is happening now. The Israel of the 60s is not really the Israel of today. And there's perceptions within, especially the Democratic voters in the US, against the genocide. And lots of very courageous Jewish voices are speaking out now in the US and around the world, because we're seeing this horror unfold in front of our own eyes. So I think the sentiment is really changing, not just globally, but even within the US itself. So you have that in the Democratic base, but also on the other hand, as part of the Republican, the MAGA base, Trump's base, also do not want to have perpetual war. And a lot of people have been speaking out, not because they love Gaza or Palestine, but actually they don't want the US to be engaged in forever war overseas.
Is this also changing the way of thinking inside the Middle East, Gulf region? Because after the attack on Qatar, we have seen a major gathering of regional leaders, Arab/Islamic or Muslim leaders, to speak. And then we saw that message which came from Pakistan, that the minister have said that the nuclear umbrella will spread now to Saudi Arabia. Is that also feeling in your region that there is more, at least temporary unity or cooperation between countries?
Yeah, definitely there is. I think especially in the Gulf, because what was seen is this is the first Israeli attack on a Gulf nation. Perhaps it won't be the last. So the Gulf leaders are rethinking security architecture of the Gulf. Of course, it's very dependent on the US. The US remains the primary security guarantor with multiple bases that are available around the region. But if you look at Qatar, for example, the biggest US base there, Al Udeid, did nothing to stop this attack, and the Americans only informed the Qataris 10 minutes after. So I think over the next period, you will see a bit of diversification of international partners. The US will still be the most important security guarantor, but you'll see, I would see that the Gulf countries will work and coordinate together, as well as seek external partnerships like the one we've seen Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Qatar has a very strong relationship with Turkey. The UAE has a strong relationship with South Korea and France and so on. So I think people will diversify their defense partnerships and security partnerships much more, because the perception is, from our regions at least, is that the US is not as reliable as it seems to have been historically.
When we are speaking about region, the new player on the scene, and somehow unusual player on the scene, is Ahmed al-Sharaa, who was up to recent branded as a terrorist, but now is accepted on the international scene at the UN to speak as the president of Syria, at least temporary president of Syria. But in constellation of relations and his own past, Benjamin Netanyahu has also tried to stir up conflict with him. How dangerous can that be for the region, knowing that he has forces and knowledge about guerrilla warfare and forces who were fighting until last few months with forces which are very strong of Syrian government? Can that destabilize or stabilize region if Netanyahu knows that al-Shara can be very dangerous for him?
Well, I think the Israelis want to destabilize Syria. They do not want to have Syria succeed as a nation state in transition. So that's why they have taken a part of the border. They have increasingly hit the ammo depots, the army depots that the military has, because also the Turks have been supporting the al-Shara government and other governments. So I think we will see definitely further incursions by the Israelis because they do not want the government in Syria to succeed.
President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is very strong in his words when he's sending messages towards Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but his actions are non-existent. He threatened so many times in the last 2 years to Benjamin Netanyahu, do something else and we will react to that, but there is no that reaction from his side. Is there a reason why he's trying to scare him just with words and not by actions, despite the fact that he's promising that the action will follow?
Again, it comes down to politics, and Erdogan obviously is a very smart politician. He has popularity around the world as one of the leaders of the Muslim world and so on. So his rhetoric is very tough. But my understanding is, and I'm not a Turkey expert, that much of the trade that is going between Turkey and Israel remains, and the military relationship remains. He hasn't cut off any of that, but he's been increasingly using this tough rhetoric. But I think maybe he's trying to pressure Israel without really seriously cutting the ties that they have with the Israelis.
Another element here is Palestinian Authority, the West Bank. Mahmoud Abbas spoke at the UN General Assembly, but that was via link. He's old, he's ill, he's weak, physically weak. But there is a lot of discussions about who might succeed him, who might come after him. Is there a really possibility that the Palestinian Authority can be revived and to be a partner and a player in Gaza and the West Bank in the day after Gaza is over?
That's a great question, and again, if you want to reflect on South Africa and the end of apartheid, there was a very strong boycotts, divestment movement internationally, but also the ANC and Nelson Mandela were strong inside the country, and Nelson Mandela was able to lead his country out of apartheid. So unfortunately, with the Palestinians, the Palestinian liberation movement is divided, obviously between Hamas and Fatah and the PLO, and within Fatah itself, it's very corrupt. And Mahmoud Abbas is also very old. So I think there needs to be some sort of leadership transition and perhaps through an election to find fresh faces, because I think the current Palestinian leadership on both sides, whether it's Hamas, whether it's Fatah, is not really serving the Palestinian people right. So this is the final piece of the puzzle, how the Palestinians can have leadership. There is one man, of course, Barghouti, who is in jail, and he has lots of, he's very popular, but the Israelis know that he is very popular and do not want to release him, of course, but he's the type of man that can bring together all the Palestinian factions and be the other side of the negotiating table. If there's going to be a negotiated settlement, a two-state solution, you have to have an Israeli sitting on one side, you have to have a Palestinian sitting on one side. Currently, the Palestinian side is weak and is not really representative of of Palestinian society and people and so on. So I think there has to be a leadership change in Fatah.
Yeah, discussion about Marwan Barghouti is long one. We listened for years and years, but can that be arranged with, I don't know, pressure of United States or someone else to get him out and place him to replace Abu Mazen?
Yeah, perhaps that could be one way, but then again, I think the Israelis do not want to have some sort of Nelson Mandela-like figure come out of jail, become very popular, and so on. But I mean, there's other candidates, there's other names. The Palestinian people are very rich people with culture, with human resources. So there has to be somebody. But the Palestinian people have to be involved in the decision to select who their leader is. And unfortunately, there's been no elections as well. But there needs to be some sort of way for the Palestinians to channel who they want to lead them in the future.
I'll give you two more names for the end of this conversation as a potential leaders, and I want to hear your opinion on them because their names were in discussions over the place in the last few years. One is Salam Fayyad, the other one is Nasser al-Kidwa.
So I'm less familiar with Nasser, but Fayyad I've known because I used to work for Brookings, and he's an ex-Brookings colleague. He's an excellent technocrat. Definitely still a bit on the older side, but definitely could be a leader in the interim capacity because he has the technical know-how, he has the connections with the Western world, with the Arab world as well. So Fayyad would be an excellent name, but we're looking for a transitionary name. We're not looking for the long term. These are older men, so it's great to have them in the interim, but in the long term, I think the Palestinian people need to decide who they should be led by. And it definitely should not be Tony Blair and Ghazali.
Thank you, Mr. Ghaffar, for this conversation, and I hope we will speak soon again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.